Welkom terug en dankie dat jy vanoggend saam kyk na die groot ontbyt. Hierdie is nou 'n baie belangrike gesprek wat ons gaan hê en ek sien julle gesels ook lekker saam op ons Facebook-blad daaroor. Ons gesels vanoggend oor die wêreldwye tendens van gesinsoorbetalings. Dit is wanneer mense geld huis toe stuur vir hulle families en dalk in 'n ander land of in 'n ander dorp en in 'n ander stad werk. Saam met ons op die lyn is Jonathan Holden om te kom gesels oor Internasionale Dag van Gesinsoorbetalings wat jaarliks in Junie plaasvind in 'n waarneming, dit is 'n waarneming van die Verenigde Nasies wat die deurslaggewende bydrae erken van meer as 200 miljoen trek-arbeiders wat finansiëel ondersteuning gee aan meer as 800 miljoen familielede in lae en middelvlak-inkomste lande. Soos jy kan hoor, 'n baie belangrike gesprek. Jonathan, good morning and welcome.
Morning. Thank you for having me on the show.
Jonathan, I want to start with the fact that South Africa is the largest remittance sender in Africa. This is a very broad and important topic. Let's start by just reminding our viewers what a remittance sender is.
So basically, there's a huge amount of people globally, approximately 200 million people, who have moved to another country like South Africa to make a better life, to create some wealth, and then send it home to family members who've remained at home. And South Africa, certainly in the African context, is a very big example of that. So we have, some people estimate between 3 and 8 million people living in South Africa that are actually not originally from South Africa. So those people are all trying to make a living here and then send money back home to their families, which obviously provides for things like education and food, and also asset building. So people send money home so that they can build houses or buy farming equipment, and just start to basically create wealth in their own countries.
Jonathan, we're going to talk about soulmate in a few minutes, but I just want to talk in general at this stage. From experience, I understand that it is very costly to send money to some of the African countries when you make use of the European, what do you call that thing? When you are sending money, when you make use of that service, the cost of it is so high. And I want to know whether something is being done to ensure that that cost is lower for those people who are sending the money.
The cost is high, and especially in South Africa, which is a bit sad for us, and obviously something we're trying to address. But let's understand the reason why that cost is so high. I think there's a few contributing factors. One, there are not enough players in the market. So some of the big banks, dominate, and there are some smaller players, a lot of international companies, but there's just not the scale and the infrastructure. And the second thing is that, South Africa is largely a cash economy. As much as we're trying to move away from that towards the more digital space. But the more cash is in a system, the higher the risk and the higher the costs. And that is unfortunately the situation we face at the moment. So yes, we're trying to bring those costs down, and that'll include having more players and getting more people banked that are currently unbanked. So getting financial inclusion to become a reality, where everything operates in a digital world, where there's scale, and then that helps to bring the costs down.
When you say South Africa is a cash society, how does that compare to the rest of the world and the landscape? How digitalized is the rest of the world?
I think there are different extents of that. So if you look at, I would say similar economies are better. So like Southeast Asia, for example, could be comparable, or perhaps even South America. They seem to be a lot further advanced in terms of financial inclusion than we are in Africa, and specifically South Africa. But it's not a problem that goes away quickly, and those sort of territories still do operate largely on a cash basis like we do. But the answer, in my opinion, to this problem is to, everyone talks about financial inclusion, but to the extent that we can achieve that, then we don't have cash, we have electronic transactions. It inherently just brings the cost down of doing everything, including sending money overseas.
I am interested to know, with the economy being what it is, how does it affect the amount of money, according to your experience, that people are sending back home? I ask this because I know even though there are economic pressures, people still have that responsibility to look after the people back home. So how's the economy affecting it?
That's a good question. Obviously, it's not in the greatest position at the moment. People are earning less. There are, fewer jobs in the market. We find, particularly with our customer base, people tend to work casual jobs as opposed to fixed formal employment. But somehow people seem to keep going and having side hustles, and our business is growing. We're seeing people deposit money from various jobs, from construction to farm laborers to factory workers. So there is still a need, and people are still finding a way.
They are finding the way. I think that's the key. I always find it so interesting. A lot of the people sending money back home, they are low-income workers, as you just mentioned, and yet they will keep their lives so small in South Africa, live in one small room, Jonathan, and then build this big mansion back home for the family. Is this something that is culturally just enshrined in them, or is it financial advice that they are getting from somewhere? How do they know how to manage their finances this way?
Yeah, I think we perhaps underestimate the level of financial savviness that people have. It's obviously the biggest part of your life when you're trying to run a family. So I think the people, let's talk about the South African case, the people that come to live and work here have almost been sent on a pilgrimage or a voyage, if you like, to go and make the money to send home. And most of those people plan to retire back home as well. So they're also building for their own retirement and their own, few years after work. So I suppose there's incentive, but it's very true. They do live very sort of meager means whilst here to be able to send as much money home as they can.
Wow.
I do want to ask you about this statistic. We all know that there's been this big debacle around the ZEP holders in South Africa, which has now been extended. But according to the Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe, Jonathan, Zimbabwe's diaspora community accounted for 1.66 billion US dollars. That's in remittances in 2022. That's up from 1.43 billion in 2021. But this is the interesting thing. South Africa was the biggest contributor, sending more than $500 million. That's 40%, followed by the United Kingdom, the USA, and Australia. Does this at all have a big impact on our economy? Is it contributing to our economy locally at all?
Potentially, you could say contributing in a negative way, because those are all, offshore cash flows that are leaving our country. But remember, that big sort of 40% chunk is all going back to Zimbabwe, our next door neighbor. And, in a weird sort of sense, it helps to contribute to stabilizing the region. Zimbabwe is a neighbor. We need them to be economically sustainable as well. They import our goods. It's money leaving the country, but at the same time, it is providing other benefits that are maybe more long-term.
Yeah. You did speak earlier about the fact that for a while there was just a few role players, as I said earlier, like Western Union, who had monopoly over this industry. People like yourself, Soulmate, you are now fighting for inclusion and the digital expansion of this industry. Tell us about Soulmate and how it's affecting the landscape in South Africa.
We have a huge number of unbanked people, which is really why we decided there was an opportunity in South Africa. There are also other reasons, time zones and various other things, but the huge unbanked population and the relatively high cost of our banking infrastructure are two perfect factors that combine to create an opportunity. So we've created some technology that enables someone who can't enter the formal banking environment to get an account. It's basically a digital app that you download. and then your employer or yourself, you can deposit money into it. You can keep it safe until you need to spend it. It comes with a linked debit card if you want that. And then, of course, talking about money remittances, once you've been paid, we work through a partner, and you can simply transfer that money back home, wherever that may be, right from the safety of your couch. So what it also means for people now is they don't have to stand in queues. They don't have to walk around with cash. And, in most cases, they don't have to spend on a taxi fare to go and make the transaction. So ultimately our solution, and any digital solution for that matter, is reducing costs that aren't always so obvious. So just that very small example of having to not have to take a taxi to go into town reduces a person's sort of personal expenditure.
Jonathan, we have about 40 seconds. I just want to know why digital wallets have worked so well in Africa. Is it because of the cell phone penetration?
Definitely the one factor, and a necessary factor. Without the phones, without smartphones, the technology doesn't work too well. And secondly, I think it's simple to use, and it is a lot more cost effective than traditional banking.
Yes, Jonathan, my apologies. We've run out of time, but I do want to ask this question. When it comes to Soulmate, how easy is it for people to withdraw in the other African countries? Because I know that's the challenge. Sending it is not the problem, but the availability of withdrawal facilities in those countries, that's the problem. We have 20 seconds.
It is an issue, but we work with a partner that has a number of different outlets in the major centers around Zimbabwe, for example, and in other countries. And so as long as those people are educated as to where to collect the funds, then it works fairly well. But it is a good point that you make.
Thank you so much for your time today. Dit is natuurlik die insig daarvan Jonathan Holden. Hy is van Soulmate. Baie insiggewende gesprek vanoggend, en die gesprek op die groot ontbyt oor ander dinge en die nuus gaan net hierna voort.